Hi Modpo, this is Lily with your Canon challenge for week 2. So you've studied several works by Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson, and now you've come to this chapter where we've taken a jump in time and hopped all around to poems from several decades by several different poets. So I wanted to take this opportunity to say that one negative influence the formation of a poetry canon sometimes has is to make the linearity of time the main narrative inside the canon. We think that to focus only on historical linear time narratives does an injustice to how working artists actually work, which is by pulling influences and making connections, looking forward and backwards all across time. So throughout Modpo, you'll probably notice many anachronistic poems that mess with the time chronology from week to week, which we see as doing the work of tracing and connecting, rather than painting a linear picture of the story of American avant-garde poetry. We also never want to suggest that the poems we study earlier in the course are somehow less evolved or less developed than those we study later. Actually, we're looking more at fluid movement of ideas and concepts over time, kind of shape-shifting, morphing, building on top of or next to, rather than a story of improvement or evolution. And studying poems out of so-called order really helps with that. Many of the poems and poets you'll meet in this chapter are by poets you'll see elsewhere in the course, particularly William Carlos Williams, who has his own chapter next week in week 3, Ray Armantrout, who you'll see again with the language poets in week 8, and Allen Ginsberg, who will appear again, of course, in the Beat Poet Week, week 6. A more conventional canon narrative might only include poets with one sphere of influence or as part of one poetic movement. But we're really interested in the many voices and influences that shape each of our syllabus poets' works and the interconnections between movements and influences as well. Something to think about as you peruse this material is how useful the dichotomy we've painted between Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson actually is when we move away from the works by those two specific poets by a step or two, as we've done here in week 2. For example, do you see the influences or interpretations of forms and approaches to writing of both Whitman and Dickinson in any week 2 poems from the main syllabus or Modpo Plus? And another question to consider. Whitman and Dickinson are so widely read and heavily canonized when teaching and telling the story of American poetry. But they're fundamentally two white 19th century writers whose perspectives and approaches can only represent so many people. And as we saw last week through Divya Victor's W for Walt Whitman's Soul, may actually enclose harm and harmful ideologies in their work. So how do later poets of this week and beyond contend with that? Finally, Modpo Plus continues the survey-style curation of week 2 with many more voices who respond directly to or trace the influences of Whitman and Dickinson. And I really encourage you to look for more there in Modpo Plus, although of course it's in no way exhaustive in its collection of these voices. In particular, we have developed lots of Lori Niedecker content. She's a poet we won't really see in later weeks of Modpo. So if you really enjoyed the Dickinsonian qualities of Grandfather Advised Me, You Are My Friend, and Foreclosure, be sure to check out Modpo Plus Part 1 in the Resources tab and then scroll to week 2.